Hey guys, this is Super Gamer 61499 here. Uh Today, I guess it's sort of like a sister video to the whole why ownership doesn't exist in isolation. Today I'm going to be making, another video, but this time it'll be about why I feel the topic of remakes, remasters, ports, what have you, recomps, decompilations, why I find them all so unique, so nuanced. I guess like why we should, think about it like critically, yeah. If we're gonna discuss video games as art, you know, you might be asking right now, what sprung up this like this random topic that I'm thinking about? And part of it was a video I saw by Video Game Esoterica. Silent Hill PC port updated. No more tank controls. Fully playable too. Uh, you know, I know there are some people I know that inevitably might not get why I would take issue with this. And like as I saw in the video, uh since I am a big fan of Silent Hill 1, I am kind of legit offended about that, like a static recomp, which, allegedly, well, not even allegedly, I go on the README page for the GitHub of Silent Hill Decomp, and it says Silent Hill AI assisted PC port. The thing that offends me is not even so much the idea that someone doesn't like tank controls, but that someone telling me that tank controls for like the original Silent Hill 1, even if it's optional with a third person camera, even if someone wanted to say that was quote unquote better, I think it's kind of crazy, honestly. I think it's kind of crazy how, like, I look at this video and I look at the comments, and as I go through it, I just say to myself, like, as a Silent Hill 1 fan, why even do this? Why would we do this to a beloved game like Silent Hill 1, even if it is optional? I understand making it run above, like above its original frame rate. I understand making it run better resolutions. I get all that. I'm all for recompilations, decompilations, doing these kind of things. I mean, hell, it's not even new, Ship a Harkinian, the Majora's Mask PC port, the Sonic Unleashed PC port, Super Mario 64 Plus. All of these technically do like some form, like updating with their resolution, their frame rate, and some even do add brand new mechanics. But I feel like for the case of Silent Hill 1, maybe this is just how I look at it, but I find it disrespectful to the original game, and I was frustrated and mad, even if it is optional, to make tank controls optional. And it made me kind of think, as someone who doesn't hate remakes, who doesn't hate mods, who doesn't hate remasters, why did I get such a strong reaction? And part of me felt compelled to make this, like rambling of a video. But, like, it's just, I don't know. To me, I find it boggles the mind how at the Silent Hill decomp with AI is being celebrated, even if it is just a beta release one, as like a positive. Like a positive for quote unquote accessibility, when all I see it is mainly hacking away at what I enjoy about the original. The fixed camera angles, the cinematography, the radio letting you know when an enemy popped up. I felt like rather than all of these things being bugs or defects, quote unquote, or limitations, a byproduct of the PlayStation 1, I thought of them as beautiful artistic decisions that really did help in the long run. After all, Silent Hill 2 and onwards, Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, and 4 all do to differing degrees, like they all do these techniques, fog, the radio, fix. Well, maybe not so much fixed camera angles, but it's definitely not manual camera controls, and there is a lot of this purposeful artistry, and I want to state whilst we go through this that I have no problems with remakes or mods. There's plenty of ones I like. And I'll list, I might as well list off some that over the years or recently that I've tried and I genuinely enjoyed. Black Mesa, the Half-Life 1 remake. It's not like the original. It definitely takes a lot of deviations, but I love it. I think it's great. Metroid Zero Mission, a remake for a game that on the original, as I went through it, I never really cared for the original Metroid one. I mean, it's good for anyone to give it a try, come to their own conclusion. But for me, when I think about which version of Metroid 1 would I prefer to play, I definitely would be more of the Metroid Zero Mission guy over the original Metroid 1. And that's just kind of how I feel personally. Let's keep going. Super Mario Remastered. That's like, it remastered not only Super Mario 1, but Super Mario The Lost Levels. It added other content from other Famicom releases. And honestly, it's got a sick as fuck level editor. I really enjoyed it, honestly. It was pretty good. The Earthbound Beginnings SNES remake. I played through that recently. I guess as sort of a test drive. That and a playthrough of the original Mother 1, and I haven't touched the game in eons. Well, and being real, I actually wasn't a big fan of Mother 1 when I originally tried it years ago. But coming to Earthbound Beginnings on top of the Mother 1 original, I found myself liking and respecting both a lot. There's plenty more. Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit, a pretty great fan of reimagining, the original Sonic Triple Trouble, which I think is a pretty decent game. Tony Hawk Rethawed, which I made a video on, if you want to check that out. But I will say, to give a warning, that the audio isn't the best. The audio is a little crap, and I didn't know what I was doing. Smash Brothers Project Plus, there's like a ton of examples. Mario Kart Wii, Resident Evil 1 remake. I think Resident Evil 1, the original, is pretty good. It's still like a decent game, but Resident Evil 1 remake, I think is great. Persona 3 Reloaded, which I like. The Sonic classic game remasters, which I enjoy. Smash Remix, which I find a fun expansion of Smash Brothers for N64. The plethora of Night Dive remasters, Quake, Doom, System Shock 1 and 2, the Turok trilogy, Thief. All of these are great. All of these I enjoy. The list can go on. But you get the idea. Like, really, I enjoy a lot of remakes, When I play through something like Halo Combat Evolved on the Halo MCC collection for PC, I never think to myself, oh, well, I feel like this is an inferior version of the game. And I guess, don't get me wrong, I do think Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, Halo 3, and so on, those have value still on, their original hardware. After all, without the original Bungie, original releases on Xbox and Xbox 360, there wouldn't be a Halo the Master Chief Collection. Or hell, I enjoy the many versions of Puyo Puyo Su, the second Puyo game in the original compile timeline, not the localized versions like Dr. Robotnik's Beam Beam Machine or Kirby's Avalanche. I think the Puyo Puyo Su on Genesis, Super Nintendo, arcade, and the PS2 Sega Ages version are all excellent, in my opinion. Honestly, I wanted to state all of this first because I wanted to make a point that I like remakes, I like remasters, I like mods, I like all this stuff, really. Like, I don't see any of it as necessarily harming video game history in a sense, because I think as long as the original is preserved, and as long as websites like Minerva Archive, CD Romance, Vim's Lair, and all that, as long as they continue to exist in this indefinite timeline, I can't be like too upset that there are new versions, new interpretations. Like it's part for the course, I think, to say if I were to be so headstrong against remakes existing like Star Fox for Switch just because I wasn't interested in it, then I'd have to also admit, well, why do remakes for a lot of games exist? And I guess the reality is we all know deep down a lot of remakes in the corporate land exist mainly for money. Yeah? But that doesn't mean people can't enjoy those on their own merits and compare them to the original. And I encourage people, all the time, like Monkey Ness and Cybershell and Gaming Brit and whoever, to compare and contrast what different versions of a game have to offer. There's plenty of reasons to talk about these things and have respect for everything to some degree. I think. But I do think original releases of video games, like whether you want to say the 1.0 revisions, the original Japanese releases, or you want to say the very first release of a game, just period, even if it's just revision 1.1, 1.2, whatever, those all still have value. Hell, I still say to people, even if we do talk about some games like Cyberpunk 2077 in a better light nowadays, and same with I'm pretty sure it was No Man's Sky. Like No Man's Sky 1.0 versus No Man's Sky nowadays is like a completely different beast. And not to mention Destiny 2. One reason I say a lot of these still have value is because they're still different from later revisions or later subsequent remasters or remakes. Well, like whenever I think of the plethora of Wii U games that like those got remastered, like the Wonderful 101, Bayonetta 2, Super Mario 3D World. I think it's New Super Mario Bros. U, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Whenever I think about a lot of this, it's easy to forget that there are differences, even if small, with the Wii U versions and the Switch version. Like say maybe the physics in New Super Mario Bros. U for Switch, are pretty different, or the battle mode in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is pretty different compared to the original. Or even, I would even say smaller things like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze adding a Funky Kong mode. It changes the very way that someone who is a first time player, how they could approach Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. You get the idea. There's like a tons of examples that I could use. And I don't think any of these existing is a problem. When I think about remakes, more in particular, I think the issue with remakes, in a more broader sense, isn't even about the quality of a given remake. I mean, maybe, we could debate all day whether, say, Blooper did a good job with Silent Hill 2, and I don't personally think they did, or MGS3 Delta. I don't think Konami did a good job remaking a beloved game like Snake Eater, but I think the bigger issue is more the oversaturation of remakes, the oversaturation that these are meant to replace the originals, the feeling art itself. And I guess on some philosophical level, I disagree with this. Remakes are meant to replace the original, or this decomp is meant to make the original irrelevant. Or even with remakes, again, like Resident Evil 1, Or, Half-Life 1. I still respect the original. I still think they're great. I think they still have historical value and are worth playing. And those, in one of those cases, Valve was actually able to maintain both because of Crowbar Collective getting the license for the Source engine, but we still have Half-Life 1, and that is pretty beneficial, whereas Konami and Capcom, like Konami, you have to kind of convince, unless it's like an arcade release, like the Gradius collection or the Castlevania collection. You have to convince them that the original Silent Hill games have value still, like value beyond just simply playing it. And hell, well, you guys know, Capcom had to be convinced by Good Old Games just to re-release the original Resident Evil trilogy. And to be honest, that really should tell you a lot where we are in the current market. It's just kind of a shame how I think remakes, even if there are really good remakes, like ones that I just listed, like AM2R, like Zero Mission, the Spyro Reignited trilogy, the Crash Insane trilogy, or the Pac-Man World 1 and 2 remakes. Like, those are all great, but I would never say the original work by Naughty Dog, or the original Namco team, or the original Insomniac games, I wouldn't say has been replaced. I think that in the current market of gaming, you should be critical, not so much just of like a remake's quality, but where does the original stand in terms of availability? There are plenty of there are plenty of remakes I like, the ones I listed. There are plenty of remakes I'm not a fan of, like Silent Hill 2 by Blooper, the Panzer Dragoon remake, or remakes from what I've seen, MGS3 Delta, like I said. And even remakes I do love, like the Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2 remakes, while I do like them, I do think they come with like unfortunate caveats, like the Majima Everywhere system. Yakuza 1, it's missing a couple of the side stories. In Yakuza 2, an entire section of the game outside of, Sotenbori, the district of Osaka, you know, a whole ass area from Yakuza 2, Shin Seicho was taken out of the remake in service of a pretty lame, like, instead have to go through Sotenbori and try to find Santas in order to find what happened, Jingwen massacre. Like I said, I'm sorry I mispronounced it. I'm not the best admittingly with this. But I am trying. You know, even though the Yakuza Kiwami remakes, like 1 and 2 at least, even though I do enjoy them for what they are, I still think it's a shame that the original Yakuza 1 and Yakuza 2 have never been re-released outside of the Japanese-only Yakuza 1 plus 2 HD collection for Nintendo Wii U and the PS3. It's hard to call these replacements when even the smaller details, like cinematography and the gameplay, are so radically changed. Whether or not you prefer them, and that's like a whole nother conversation. But like, to me, I think that people shouldn't say that remakes replace, quote, the original, unquote. They do not. And it's just really, I think it does a disservice not only to the remake that you're trying to defend, but it is disrespectful to the original team that did make the game, like the original. I like to think that even if you didn't care for the original, like Metroid 1, that there were still people, working their asses off to try to make it within, the tight confines of the original hardware, like whether it was old IBM computers, Apple II, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn, there's still value to those original versions. I guess I wouldn't be so up in arms with part of this. Like, sure, if everyone had a computer, like, say I got a gaming desktop, I got a Steam Deck, and I got a gaming laptop all set up for emulation, remasters, remakes, what have you. But like the thing is, even with just recomps and decompilations, console gamers, unless they want to hack their console, like their Switch, their PS4, their Xbox One, their Xbox Series S or X, unless they want to hack their piece of hardware in order to have, the emulation and even like fan PC versions like Silent Hill Enhanced Edition, if they wanted to even get those, they have to hack their console and their piece of hardware. Inevitably, if they're not careful though, they can they can brick their console. For PC gamers, this is not an issue. It's like a non-factor to me. I always just say to myself, well, I might as well play both versions, but really, I think in an official capacity, you should be able to have every significant version of a game, regardless of whether or not you prefer the remake or not. That's just the most fair, I think, personally. And that's just how I look at it. Well, the thing also, and more on the positive end, when I think about the modern re-releases of a ton of stuff, even when I was a kid with the Wii Virtual Console, it did get me into retro games more. Like sure, not all the games were on the Wii Virtual Console. Some were probably even Japanese only. Like when I was a kid in 2008 or 2007 or 2009, when I had a white Wii and a black Wii, I was able to play games like Bubble Bobble, Double Dragon, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario 64, Ocarina Time, Majora's Mask, Mario Kart 64, Mario Party 2, and what have you. And hell, there's a ton of value even in just separate game releases, like the Mega Man Anniversary Collection, the Sonic Mega Collection. You have, the Capcom Arcade Collection, the Namco Museum Collections on PlayStation 1, which I grew up with. Even today, you have the Tetris Collection, you have the Capcom Fighting Collections, including the Marvel vs. Capcom games. You have the Contra Collection, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, Cowabunga Collection. What I even mentioned with the Halo Collection, Tomb Raider, Legacy of Kain. I'm glad that all of those versions, by the way, they don't only just preserve, the remake visuals. It also does the original if you want to have the original experience or the original graphics or the original controls. And for me, that's preserving video games officially. There's a ton of more I could also mention, the Sega Ages re-releases for arcade games like Virtua Cop, Puyo Puyo, Virtua Racing, and so on. Gradius Origins. The way I look at it, when I think about video game ports and video game collections, I tend to be really happy with them. Like, at the very least, even if I don't always buy like all the recent ones, I enjoy retro and classic games are currently available. Hell, in certain cases, like the Atari 50th collection, I think there is value to having that over the original releases or the AM2 releases of certain arcade games like Gradius. You get better frame rates, you get better performance, you get everything in a nice convenient package. And I know some people right now might scoff and say, oh, well, why would you need to have it in the convenient collection? But remember what I said, not everyone has access to emulation or a Steam Deck or whatever, like a gaming laptop like I do. I still value these collections. They keep games going. They keep games within the current gaming space. And the worst thing that you can do with a collection is introduce new problems. But as long as you don't, you should generally be fine. I compare it, I guess in my mind, whether or not people disagree with me is a matter of taste. I compare it to re-releasing and remastering old movies that are well beloved, well respected, or matter a lot in some kind of historical cinematography sense or whatever culturally. And like here's some examples, I guess, of like what I mean with that. Like I think of the original I think of Gone with the Wind, the original Psycho, Grave of the Fireflies, like one of my personal favorite movies, Angel's Egg, which is getting a re-release, the original Blade Runner, The Thing from Another World, 2001 A Space Odyssey, Blue Velvet, like Princess Mononoke, Finding Nemo. Regardless of however you feel about these movies, like the ones I mentioned, like 2001 A Space Odyssey or Jinro the Wolf Brigade, these all have value. These all have value to being re-released. They matter. They have artistic highs. They have a lot of respect. And just like even to me, for even someone to say a remake of Psycho could replace the original 1960s Alfred Hitchcock movie would be an insane take. When I listen to someone say to me, that remake of Silent Hill 2, that replaces the original Silent Hill 2 for me. And I say, but they're not even the same games. It's just reinterpreted to be something else entirely. It's not even within the entire same framework as the original. And I feel like a lot of people ignore that for some reason in gaming discussion over I guess just the idea, oh well, maybe they'll have to dig up their old PS2s or use emulation or the Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition to play through the original Silent Hill 2. It's very weird. Like you never really see movie channels like Matt Draper or like even the bottom of the barrel movie channels. I rarely see anybody in a movie channel. Whenever I do occasionally watch one, I would never see anyone suggest to me the George Romero original Night of the Living Dead replaces the remakes that would come after, or the Crazies. The original Crazies still has value over the remake. And hell, there's other examples I can give. The Thing from Another World, still has value over the more respected The Thing by John Carpenter. Gene Wilder's, Willy Wonka, it still has value to watch over the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory 2005 remake. You have the Universal Frankenstein movie, from the 1930s. Like that, that's not replaced by Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Or John Carpenter's original Halloween is not replaced by Rob Zombie's Halloween. You get the idea. Like, I could keep going on. Disney's Alice in Wonderland, the original, does not replace the Tim Burton reimagining, and vice versa. Like I could keep going on, but it's the same with video games. There's plenty of examples, even in remakes I like. There are things I like There are things I dislike. Pac-Man World 2, V-Pac's bosses, I'm glad they overhauled. I'm glad they made them a lot more challenging and a lot more involved compared to the original. I thought the originals were a lot more simplistic, more repetitive by comparison. Halo Combat Evolved's original art style, compared to the Anniversary art style, I thought Halo Combat Evolved's original art style by Bungie was way better than the Combat Evolved Anniversary art style, which I just felt like was way too busy, was way too was way too clean. It felt like a lot of that atmosphere of the Forerunner architecture, it was cleaned up, but it missed the point of being on, places like like the Pillar of Autumn, and all that, the assault on Control Room, and even the introduction of the Flood. These these things do subtly change the way you enjoy the original game's atmosphere. And this goes doubly true even for Campaign Evolved. It seems like it's doubling down on my issues with Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, but but exasperating even more problems onto it. The sprint being infinite, I will never understand beyond just the marketing push. Why do we need a remake of Halo Combat Evolved that puts infinite sprinting in the game when the original Halo Combat Evolved on Xbox and even on Anniversary, even in spite of Anniversary's new graphics problems, I at least appreciated they still had the original framework. It's like the main reason, on top of the original graphics getting fixed in the Halo Master Chief Collection on PC through updates, that's one reason I give it a pass nowadays. You just, all of this stuff informs, Halo's texture as a game. And as I probably mentioned to a lot of friends before, I love Black Mesa, and that takes a lot of deviations from the original Half-Life 1. Hell, Zen in the original, and I'm sorry if this is a normie take, but Zen in the original was tired, exhausted. It felt like they ran out of steam. It felt like the most rushed part of the original game. And as much as I love Half-Life 1 and respect it a lot, I'm glad Black Mesa did overhaul and fleshed it out, overhauled Zen, and also make a ton of other nuanced changes. As I mentioned before, Yakuza Kiwami 2 cutting out Seicho. Shin Seicho was for, it doesn't matter if you couldn't do anything in the town or not, other than save and go into a shop. The point is, with Yakuza Kiwami 2, they shouldn't have cut out that part of the game. Small or big, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really capture what the original Yakuza 2 went for. I can keep going on, but you get the idea. Kirby Superstar Ultra, for one more example, it had way more content than the Super Nintendo original. And I find the Superstar Ultra version to be way better, in my opinion. because it's way more content rich, in my opinion. I know I kind of rambled a bit just now, but you know, I have to ask myself actually now, since we got this far, and I talked about remasters and remakes and all that, where do ROM hacks and patches fit into this convo? There's a ton of ones out there that I could list. That I think, for better or worse, depending on your perspective, they will change the fundamental experience of what you were trying or what you were playing. Pac-Man speed hacks, fan translations for, like games that originally either had butchered localizations or, had no localization. Pac-Man Plus, character hacks for Sonic games or Tony Hawk, the PC versions. The fast ROMs for Super Nintendo, for stuff like Contra 3, Star Fox 1, anything basically that was a shmup like Gradius and the like, for PC. Fundamental ROM hacks that quote unquote, quote, fix problems, unquote, like the Castlevania 1 knockback, or in Donkey Kong 1, how Jumpman has a fixed, like a fixed jump and fall damage. I find stuff like that a lot more drastic to me, but, like that's just how I feel. Like there's also, expanded games from their original vision, like Mother 2 Deluxe and Mega Man X3 Zero Project. I can keep going on, but like there's so many examples out there, even with retro games, even just a ROM hack or a mod, positive or negative, that's in the eye of the beholder, but the thing I take away from it is they aren't good for judging a game critically when it was originally released, They are fun to play with. I've done them a lot. I mean, I would be pretentious if I told you, oh no, I have issues with ROM hacks. Because, like, that would be silly. Like, I love ROM hacks. I like playing games in brand new ways. I like trying new expansions for original frameworks that already existed. The plenty of Super Metroid ROM hacks is crazy, just for that alone. But I think we should, if we are to judge art, we should try to judge art through the version that we specifically played, or if we are going to say we're going to play the original, like Mother 1, or like Mario 1, or Halo 1, or MGS2, or, Shadow of the Colossus, we should try to specifically play the original and not a ROM hack, not a, whatever was released basically in retail. It's not good to, when we're talking about games, in a critical context through their original versions, it's bad not to disclose this shit. And why I feel that way is because it does muddy the water of how do you talk about art in a more critical sense, not in the casual sense, but in a critical sense. It's a lot more difficult to, like I told you before, like with Silent Hill 1, putting the camera in third person, removing, the fixed camera angles, and, like removing a lot of the cinematography and, the tank controls, it does fundamentally alter what, playing Silent Hill 1 is like. Playing the original Mother 1 and comparing it to the SNES remake. Even I had to admit to myself, while I do prefer the Mother 1 remake through the Earthbound engine, I do think the original Mother 1 still has value. It has value as an experience. And hell, vanilla Mega Man X3, and you compare it to the Zero Project, they're like completely different games when you think about it. I can think of plenty of examples how using mods to supplement a review and like talking about things out of their original context, it can cause a lot of problems. whether it be Game Boy games and not getting the sound or the visuals right, or playing PlayStation 1 games and complaining they had blurry textures, quote unquote, in 4X or in 4K with no antroscopic filtering or CRT with you or CRT filtering is counterintuitive to how these games were designed, in my opinion. You know, I could try to throw in one more example to get my point across. If I were to judge Doom and try to, say rather than try to have Doom work the way it does with the, shooting the enemy, it doesn't matter if they're up or down, as long as you shoot in the similar direction they are, you can hit the enemy. But if I were not to disclose that Doom 1 mod, like say if I picked one of those Jeezy Doom and say, okay, now Doom guy he could shoot upwards or shoot down, like if I didn't disclose that, that would kind of give you the wrong impression of Doom 1 and how it works as a game. Part of it and why I think it does matter is a lot of art discussion is down to perspective. How you look at it, how the subtle alterations inform how you look at the final product, how altering said subtle differences can have profoundly negative or profoundly positive effects that can change the very way we talk or discuss or even engage with art. It's the same with, it's like if someone said with, say for example, if someone kept saying to me, the Star Wars Special Edition sucked, and I want the original theatrical surround sound, mono sound, original version of Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars Return of the Jedi officially, it's like if I kept saying, well, there are fan edits over and over, like the Star Wars 4K 77, 4K 79, 4K 83, the despecialized editions, and I kept saying, oh, but those, because those exist, you should judge them that way. And I say, whether or not I personally love the Star Wars special editions or the later additions or subtractions George did with those movies is entirely irrelevant. I think that you should still have the original Star Wars release on home media officially, even if I do prefer the Star Wars special editions, like the 2004 cuts, the 2011 Blu-rays. I enjoy both of these versions, for the most part. But, fan edits can't supplement the fact that we do live in a reality. Even if I'm not as upset with this, I think that, at the very least, it wouldn't hurt to have the original Star Wars versions of the movies available in some official capacity. It doesn't really hurt my enjoyment of the movies, and it only just helps preservation in the long run. And fan edits shouldn't need to just like how with video games, fan edits, fan mods, fan expansions, they shouldn't need to fix something if, say you feel like something is a problem. I guess, like I say, like with these mods, a lot of them with video games or, game ROM hacks, they're all a matter of taste, but to say these are objectively better, quote unquote, to the original vision or the revised vision, I think is a matter of taste, and that we should try to think of this stuff critically. It is like a fan film edit, and let's be honest, a lot of the way we do engage with art, at least for those who are on PC, it is a lot like a fan edit, in my opinion. The way I look at it, the only quote real way, unquote, like, the only real way to judge art accurately in its original critical context is to experience the game without the mods and without, the original ROM hack. Experience the game without mods or ROM hacks in mind. Basically, I think of it like this. It's like how you wouldn't judge a Bethesda game as great just because the mods for Bethesda games like Skyrim are great. And in that same way, you wouldn't judge a film edit, being great by saying, oh, well, Project 4K77 exists, or, oh, well, I would judge Mother 1 as a game by saying, oh, but the Earthbound Beginnings ROM hack is amazing on SNES. And, these all have value, but the same type of logic. They all have value. They all have their place in gaming, and they have their place in our society. But in an official sense, you're not really playing the game as it originally was. And honestly, I think them existing are fine. There's a ton of nuances, like I said, to be aware of when talking about art. And it is important. Mechanics can change, frameworks can change, license tracks from, even other games can change over time. God knows you guys probably remember, the original GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas music. It wasn't even in the remakes or the re-releases or the remasters, all because they were licensed music. Or the countless car licenses for Ford and all that in tons of racing games. Those all change how you interact with those games. Not in the sense that the mechanics change, but the texture around the games changes. Music, sound design, graphics changing. Even the very idea of other revisions can change subtly even how game balancing works. Like I say, changes in art are inevitable. Art is bound to change. Art is never finished, it is only abandoned. And these aren't always negative or even positive changes, they just are changes. Whether or not you accept them, whether or not you like them, whether or not you dislike them or are indifferent, part of it is in the eye of the beholder. Hell, I can give a couple more examples while I'm at it, just like a couple more to drive the point home. In Silent Hill 2, the original, I loved, whether or not it was intended, I loved the original voice acting. I loved how awkward and almost ethereal everybody sounded in the original Silent Hill 2. It made everything feel so surreal and dreamlike, like a David Lynch movie, like Blue Velvet or Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive. But whether or not Team Silent intended it, it's a part of its game's texture. It's a part of a game's identity. To where, it's kind of like what I told someone yesterday. Whether, it goes even beyond author's intent. It's all about how you read it, the things that you enjoy, the things you dislike of art. Part of it is subjective, and part of it we should recognize is subjective, but it still matters because our own feelings on the matter, whether or not they were intended, they still inform the way we look at art. Or, with Majora's Mask 3D, I don't think it's necessarily a terrible remake, but, from most opinions I find online, even from channels like Good Vibe Gaming, or Narelle, or whoever, a lot of people agree the mechanics were changed. There were drawbacks to the Bomber's Notebook and how it worked in the remake. Tons of things about the time mechanics and the saving were changed. And whether or not you prefer those over the original Majora is a matter of taste, but in Majora 3D, I would definitely say some of these do make the game easier, depending on how you look at it. Hell, I just prefer Zora swimming, or the Goron, the Goron spinning in the original, or, I prefer Deku lily hopping in the original. Deku lily hopping in the original had a lot more fun and momentum. And a lot of this stuff has been changed in the remake, for better or worse. And, Shadow of the Colossus. I prefer the original old atmosphere of Shadow of the Colossus, that very minimalist world where things feel desolate and there isn't much life other than a couple animals, plants, and the Colossi. A lot of this stuff was revamped in the remake. Whether or not you prefer Bluepoint's interpretation of Shadow of the Colossus or the original Team Eco, original vision of, like Shadow of the Colossus, that's a matter of taste. Regardless, it is different. Basically, if I were to sum up this whole ramble into something coherent, basically, the ideas of remakes, remasters, reimaginings, ROM hacks, reinterpretations, all of them are different from the original version. And we should be aware of that. We should try to respect what the original offered, not try to devalue what the original version meant to someone. And I think remakes or remasters and all this stuff existing, I don't think is a problem. I don't think it's a detriment to gaming. I think art is bound to change, form, meaning, intent through the decades. Like there's always gonna be another version of the thing. There's always gonna be another version of Frankenstein. There's always going to be another version of, Romeo and Juliet. There's going to be multiple interpretations of even stuff like West Side Story. Maybe some brave son of a bitch will be like Spike Lee and be like, I'm gonna remake an Akira Kurosawa movie. I guess, whether or not people prefer it is going to come down to their own taste and how the quality differs from the original. But if movie critics can respect the original versions of movies without devaluing them, or the original theatrical cut versus director's cut, or the original screenplay versus another version of the screenplay, and so on, then I think we can respect, video games in that kind of sense too. I don't see why we couldn't. I think about what Monkey Nest said about Mother 1, about how a lot of Mother 1 quote unquote fans won't play the original. And I think that is kind of a shame. They'll play a remake, they'll vicariously like the characters, the soundtrack, the game design, and what have you, but they'll never try the original. It's, it is a shame. It is a shame how sometimes, as a community, we do sometimes close our mind and say, well, original versions don't have value, when really we should be trying to prove the opposite, that they do have value, even beyond just fun, but artistically. There's plenty of examples I still haven't used. The original Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition versus the remaster. Dark Souls 2 Vanilla versus Scholar of the First Sin. The countless arcade versions of certain games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Ikaruga and, whatever, Contra. It's like, I can go on and on, but you basically get the idea by now. I guess that's where I'll leave it for now. I hope you guys got something out of my rambles. I know it's kind of difficult to try to keep this on track, but I tried the best I could and tried to write more notes, keep myself on track. and share my own perspective on this whole matter. It's like what I said in that first video. I've grown up with video games ever since I was 5 years old. So whenever I think about game remakes, I think of it a lot as like, I'm not necessarily offended that they do exist, but for better or worse, game companies do try to treat like original versions as obsolete. That's why the community should stand up and try to correct companies saying no, this version of a game I like still has value, and that we should be trying to preserve our history, our subtle truths, the fundamental human truths. With that said, there are other videos I could recommend about the subject, but I'll link them in the description, if I find them. With that said, this is Super Gamer 61499. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you all have a good week, and hopefully your day goes very well. And with that said, Glenn is signing out.